The Stage Door Show, celebrating the independent artist. With your host, Dave Hondel.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Stage Door Show tonight. This is Dave Hondel. I'm really looking forward to speaking to our guest tonight. He's an Emmy Award-winning writer, producer, and historian, and I'm happy to have him on the show tonight, Mr. Daniel Blake Smith. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Hey, Dave. Thanks so much for having me on. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time. I know that you're an author of several books and films and, and dramas and documentaries. And a lot of the work that you do is based on, true, incidents that have happened in American history. And, one of the things I wanted to try to focus on tonight is history, because as a history fan myself, I tend to think that the generation that's coming up now, the younger generation, unfortunately, is unaware of a lot of the historical events that have happened, from my generation even and before. When I talk to some of the younger folks, including my own kids, they're unaware of some of the things that have happened, and I think that it's disturbing for me. Because, we learned about history in school, civil rights history, even the Revolutionary War and before, which I think kind of obviously shaped our country and shaped who we are. So I wanted to get your thoughts as a historian. What are your thoughts on, do you see a decline in historical knowledge, right, as we move along?
I'm afraid I have to agree with you, and that comes from someone who also taught history. I taught at the University of Kentucky many years, taught American history. Sure. And did my best to redirect that kind of historical ignorance. Sometimes succeeded, sometimes not. We live in a culture, as you were pointing out, that's so present moment, even down to the last few seconds. What's on my phone? What's trending in Twitter? So it probably is no surprise to people that deep historical thought and knowing about the Civil War and knowing about, what Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and their slaves felt and thought and how they lived is like miles away, some alternate universe kind of thing. Even though if they're going to make sense out of all the events that are happening today, all these issues about statues being taken down that celebrated the Confederacy, you have to understand where that came from. And if you don't, it must strike people as just kind of an odd, red state versus blue state kind of argument, and not understanding that, the statues, the Confederacy itself started celebrating itself in the late 19th and early 20th century after the Civil War, feeling they were being left out, that their glorious moment had been forgotten. But if you don't even know what any of that's about, then it makes you, I think, kind of emotionally stunted because you don't really know where you came from.
Right.
Whether it's American history, wherever you're American, you should know some of the things that happened in this country and why they happened, not just what they happened. It's not like memorizing dates. I don't think maybe that works on Jeopardy or something. But if you're really trying to go figure out who you are and the town you live in and the people you know and the race you're a part of and the race that you are confronting and whatever it is, you have to have some grasp of American culture and history. And I always find it distressing that it's an uphill battle to get people to think about that.
Well, you did a piece of work on the 1960 Greensboro, North Carolina lunch counter sit-in at Woolworth's, and I found that interesting. I think, again, that's one of the most important things that happened in our history that led to, a huge civil rights movement. So, talk about that piece of work and really how that came about and why you decided to do a piece on that.
I had a history colleague of mine who had moved into the world of public television as a development guy and was making films in Chapel Hill. And he had been on our faculty at Kentucky, and he knew I was really into storytelling in the broadest sense. But this is very early on when I was starting to do film. And he thought of, well, what if we did something on the sit-ins in 1960? I thought, well, that'd be great. Do you have a way to get to them? And, of course, he lived there in Raleigh-Durham area. And 3 of the 4 guys who sat in in 1960 at the Woolworths in Greensboro still lived. And I got to go interview them. I wrote it and helped him produce it. And by writing it, I mean, it's a documentary, you don't always write, but you compose the direction of it, you do the interviews,
sure.
and sort of frame the conversation. And I have to tell you, Dave, I have never had a more ennobling moment in my life than when I sat down with those guys independently and together.
Sure.
Because these guys at age, get this, 17 or 18, they're at North Carolina A&M in 1960, 18 years old. These weren't hardened professional activists like we see today for pro or anti-abortion or women's rights or whatever it is. These were just young kids who just found it an affront that they could not sit down, literally could walk through Woolworths, but could not sit down at the lunch counter. And like one of them said to us, he said, I wasn't trying to start a revolution, I just wanted to eat. But they also knew what they were up against.
Sure.
And it was a very existential moment. And so when I've shown that film, which I'm deeply proud of, not because I did some great thing with it, but because I was just showcasing what I consider to be one of the rarest traits you could ever possess, and that's courage.
Right.
Because if you have courage, then you can love. You have to have courage to do just about anything important. And these guys had it in spades, just unbelievable. And that's why I loved, when I taught, I loved showing it to freshmen, because I said, these are guys your age. Look what they did. And they didn't come with any advantage. They weren't, terribly rich kids or, the sons of governors or something. They're just hardworking family, came from hardworking middle-class families. Yeah. They did want to move up in the world, so they wanted to go to college. And they stood up for what they believed in. And they started a revolution. I mean, the civil rights movement got its student element going, its young person element going with the sit-ins. I'm proudest of that film just about more than anything I've ever done.
And Daniel, speaking of that film, I mean, when you were showing it, and obviously, at the film festivals and wherever, and on TV, did you have some feedback? I mean, did people ask you questions? I would imagine a film like this would prompt a lot of feedback and questions, and about the sit-in and about what you learned, which is actually part of the reason why you do something like this, is to start conversations, right? And did you see that a lot?
I did. I got lots of unusual questions. Believe it or not, it's also kind of the history of memory, because I have to tell you that several people from that area came and claimed, hey, I sat in on that day too.
Wow.
And it's just like, people just kind of wished themselves into that moment. Maybe they came the third or fourth week of it or something, but they were not the first four. I mean, there's a photographic evidence of these guys walking out together.
Right.
It's not really up for debate.
Yeah.
And people wondered, well, weren't they really motivated by these folks in Nashville who were much more professional civil rights guys? Didn't the media get a hold of them? Said, no. I know that's not only a natural question to ask these days, it's maybe even the right question to ask. Like, who was your handler? Who got you involved in this? These guys had no handlers. Yeah. In fact, they were deeply upsetting their parents when they found out about this. They said, oh my God, we sent you to college to get an education, not to start a friggin' revolution.
Yeah.
And they just acted on their impulse. It really grew out of a bull session in their dorm. They couldn't stand it anymore.
Yeah.
That was the extent. That was collaborating among themselves, not anybody else.
Sure.
Nobody believes how existential it was.
Right.
That they, on their own, they were getting financed by black churches, by the NAACP.
Yeah, right.
A lot of people, the white folks, thought this was a communist thing, and the Communist Party was sponsoring it.
Yeah.
Or they were just trying to show off in front of the cameras. It is true that this was the first sit-in. The sit-ins were one of the first civil rights moments that was televised, but they didn't know that was happening. They just went and sat down and started dealing with the consequences of it. So to me, it's like a pristine moment of people making choices about what they thought was right, and that's it.
Yeah. And what it led to is amazing.
Totally.
Yeah, and then, Daniel, I know that you did a couple award-winning pieces on Native American, situations that have happened in the past, like the Cherokee Legacy, Trail of Tears, and Black Indians in American History, or American Story, pardon me. And then, both these were narrated by, James Earl Jones.
By the way, he's part Cherokee.
Yeah, okay. I did not know that.
And Wes Studi helped out in one of them, did it in the Cherokee language, because he's a great film star.
Wow.
Last of the Mohicans and Heat and hostels, and a bunch of other things.
Was this born, a lot of it, out of you're a teacher of American history and at the university? I mean, was this something that, some of these pieces that you really love to teach and young people about, and you decided, hey, this would make a great documentary?
Partly, and I'm also part Cherokee myself. I'm 1/8.
Sure.
But my grandfather was very visibly Cherokee in part, and so that was. I'm not trying to pretend I was raised a Native American. I was not. I grew up in North Texas. I was not raised in that fact. But I came to care a lot about that story, partly because I studied. You study American history, you have to start with Native peoples, and the Cherokee story always fascinated me. It's even gotten some recent prominence. I don't know that it'll ever happen, but I could tell one anecdote. Recently famous actor Alan Richardson, who played Jack Reacher in the TV series that just came out on Amazon Prime.
Yeah, right.
That was a huge hit, and now he's a huge hit. He called me up about 2 months before that series began, and I thought, Alan Richardson, I know that name from something. He said, "Well, I'm going to be playing Jack Reacher." I said, "Oh, that's great." Not knowing how good the series was going to be.
Right.
At any rate, he said, "I got your book, An American Betrayal, Cherokee Patriots and Trail of Tears, and I love it, and I want to use it. I want to base a limited series on the Trail of Tears. I want to use your book as the basis for it." I thought, wow, that's great. I hope you've got the I didn't say this, but I hope you have the juice in Hollywood to somehow make this happen. But let's see. He said, "Well, it depends on how this works out when it comes out in, I think it was February.
Right.
We were talking in October." Boy, did it blow up.
Yeah.
And he's so big now that I don't know if it will happen because he's too big to get to it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that would be a subject worth exploring dramatically.
For sure.
I did one of the documentaries on it, but I think there'd be an important way to remind people of, this was our own kind of American Holocaust in a way, minus the deliberate decision that we're trying to kill Indians. So I wouldn't call it ethnic cleansing or like the Holocaust in that sense, but it was an inadvertent ethnic cleansing because they just moved them out, and if they died, so what? Yeah. And of course, a third of them did die.
Right.
So yes, it is a subject dear to my heart, and it was great to have the cooperation of the Cherokee Nation in the making of that documentary.
100%. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, and this caught my eye as well, is impact after the crash, about the Carrollton, Kentucky, 1988 major crash. That actually was. Was drunk driving was involved, and is this something? The reason this caught my eye is because, we're all on the highway, we're all on the roads every single day, and we never know when that one thing could impact our lives, whether it's ourselves or whether it's a family member. I have 2 children that are on the road every day as well, and they're not close to me. So I always worry about what's going on with them. And because it's never always about the way you drive, it's about somebody else and their decision to drive under, and being impaired. So, talk about that project, because that really caught my attention. And
that was it was the deadliest drunk driving crash in American history.
Yeah, right.
26 kids, actually, with 3 adults and 26 kids and 3 other adults killed on this one bus coming back from Kings Island in Ohio back to Carrollton, Kentucky,
right,
on I-71, I believe it is. And at first I thought, why do I want to do this? It's so morbid. But I found it really, if you see the film, it's spiritually very enriching, because a lot of the people, ever a church group on the bus, for one thing. Right. And there's so many poignant stories there about people who became close because they found each other and had lost their own children.
Right.
And so they became close in that sense. It's a really bonding story about how do you deal with loss. And most people dealt with it in a really, I guess you have to say, healing way.
Yeah.
It's very easy to be just simply angry and become an alcoholic or whatever. A lot of bad things happen when people lose somebody, you lose so many.
Right.
But I found it immensely uplifting to be with that community that suffered the grief that they did. The one thing we tried to get was an interview with the guy who was driving the wrong way on the interstate drunk.
Sure. Yeah.
And he just got out of prison by the time we made the film. Yeah. And we thought, well, maybe he'll feel okay. But he he couldn't deal with it. At first he said, "Yeah, come by," and then he just freaked out at the door and wouldn't talk to us.
Okay.
It's just, not that it's kind of a gotcha thing. It's okay that we didn't have it, because the real story is
the family,
not just the suffering and what happened. There's also some side issues that are important about the placement of gasoline tanks on buses back then, which are right up there by the driver's front part of the cab, and so it's easy for it to catch fire.
Sure.
But it was so many great stories of people rising from the ashes, kind of thing, to make their lives even better. There's a few stories where people just struggle to this day with it, but most of them found a way out of it. And I found that. I'm always drawn to stories of courage, and I think out of that came a lot of elements of courage.
The many award-winning films and documentaries that you did, Texas Heart being one of them as well. I guess, when did you get the passion for writing? Not just your books, but also for the screen. Where did that passion come from?
Well, probably without realizing it, my Ozark grandfather, who had such a captivating and sometimes crazy way of telling stories and making me think about the power of storytelling. I couldn't spin a yarn the way he could. Sure. But I got into history really because I thought, I love the stories that they tell. Now, it just so happened that a lot of times professional historians get caught up in deep analysis and facts and figures, which are fine, but they don't exactly sell outside of academia, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So, and that's one of the reasons I left academia when I did. I just decided I want to do things a different way. I want to tell stories for film and television. Started out in the theater, I wrote plays. I wanted to have a broader focus or platform to talk about things that mattered, whether they were historically based or not. And at first, a lot of my projects were historically based, but I moved into both because of the costs of doing historical dramas on film, and also because I just think, okay, you can tell important truths in the world that aren't rooted in history as well as true stories, even though I'm a firm believer in the old dictum that some of the best stories you don't have to make up. Right.
That's true. Absolutely. And Daniel, the other thing I wanted to kind of talk to you about is the writing. You said that you wrote for theater and also, wrote for the screen and wrote for novels. I mean, obviously there's a difference between all of those. And do you find your process to be different when you write a play or, and then writing a book? And so how does that process differ in your mind? I mean, you have to have a certain mindset before you get into each of those disciplines, I guess?
Well, it is true that even though I try to write narrative-based books, you do have to think about that as a very long-term project. I mean, I could write a script in 3 months. It takes a couple of years or more to write a book, at least a history book, not a novel. I'd write a novel in maybe 6 months or something.
Sure.
But you have to think about it as a topic that you're going to explore and learn a lot about and find a way to tell it so that it won't feel like it's forever for people to get through it. Yeah. And that calls for a lot of discipline. I mean, when I did the Trail of Tears book, American Betrayal, I just, rule number one, butt in chair at 9 a.m. or before every day and worked on that X number of pages a day. And that's after I've done all the research, which took quite a bit of time.
Right.
Novels a little different. Novels a little bit like a screenplay. In fact, one of them I've turned into a screenplay, the one called Crazy Love. As now we're working to get it set up as a film. But it came to me like a film would. By that I mean a series of scenes, and going from one voice to another. One chapter's narrated by one character, the next by another. It goes kind of back and forth between 3 or 4 different people, and that's a little unusual in novels, although it happens. It never happens in film and history books, of course.
Yeah.
But it's a way of kind of using different points of view to get people immersed in a story and maybe surprise them. Like, whoa, wait a minute. Now, I didn't realize he thought something very different from what she did, and this is making me rethink the whole thing. I like the liberation of that kind of thinking, which happens in the world of novel writing and certainly in the world of film, where, as long as the visuals and the storyline come together, you have the ability to tell it in a real postmodern way. You don't have to. There's no footnotes and all the rest that history writing requires, because everybody wants to know, where did you get that? How can you prove that that's true?
Yeah.
And what you're doing in writing films and novels is not looking at historical truth. You're looking for emotional truth.
Right.
Like, what is the truth of this character? What is the truth of the story that's being played out? You can even use an unreliable narrator, somebody who after a while you think, wait a minute, this guy's kind of making this up. I don't believe what he's saying.
Yeah, right.
You would never do that in a history book, of course.
Yeah.
You want to be able to say authoritatively, okay, in the 1960 World War sit-in, the following factors were at play, and you tell it in a real straightforward way. But you still have characters that you want people to get to know, because those characters, the way we used kind of characters in the film we did, was to give color and feeling to how these people came to the decisions that they made. It wasn't just some obvious lockstep thing. That's the other problem I always found in history, as much as I love it. The way it's taught, all the suspense and urgency is stripped out of it. It's like, learn these three things that happened in the American Revolution. But wait a minute, why did the revolution even happen? Why?
Right.
How weren't people afraid of that?
There's no why. Where's the why? Yeah.
Where's the why? Where's the fear? Where's the emotion?
Right.
Because believe me, they had it then.
Oh, sure.
We just think of it like, well, of course we had to leave those terrible British people and their authoritarian government. No, John Adams himself said it. A third of the American population in 1776 was pro-British. A third was for the revolution, and a third couldn't decide.
Yeah.
And trying to recapture that history is really important.
And I think you reminded me of something when you were talking about the Revolutionary War. Now, my wife and I lived for 10 years. I'm in Miami now, but we have a house in South Jersey, which is near Philadelphia. And the town next to us is Mount Holly, New Jersey, which is historically significant to the Revolutionary War, which led to the Battle of Trenton. And unfortunately, the skirmish that happened there that eventually led to the Battle of Trenton, it's barely even a plaque, right, on the fence where this happened, and it's all built up, and it's sad to drive past something that was so significant and part of the Revolutionary War, and it's barely even a plaque, and it's not celebrated. There's nothing. I don't know. That's when we were talking a little bit before we started recording, and it's a frustration to see that some of our historically significant events and that happen in our world are barely even a plaque on a fence post. So I guess that's the other thing that I think hopefully we can, with the help of people like yourself and creating these great documentaries, maybe we can have a new generation of historians that'll come out of this, and it'll motivate them or maybe inspire them, I guess, to be historians themselves. So that's my hope.
I hope you're right. I know that the new generation of historians, I was kind of a pioneer and a renegade in terms of professional historian who got into film. I remember I even had to have Ken Burns write a letter recommending me to get promoted.
Oh,
because
wow.
My colleagues couldn't understand how is this possibly history?
Sure.
It's just somebody putting on a film, doing a film.
Yeah.
That's not history, but of course it can be and is.
Oh, sure is.
But more and more historians are interested in telling broader stories that average people can relate to. Not everybody, but people writing textbooks aren't, of course. But people thinking about an issue that they feel like has real resonance today, try to write for that broader audience, or at least they're more attuned to it now by far than when I was there, which is just great white political figures and why they were tremendous and who's got the most footnotes and all the rest, that I found to be kind of silly. But it's not that way anymore. The question, though, that we started with is still a troubling one, which is, how do you attract young people to think history is not long ago and far away? It's what's the phrase? William Faulkner said, history's not dead. It's not even over.
Right. It's not. It's every day is history. We're making history right now, right?
Right.
You think about it.
If you get people to think that it's not long ago and far away, it's right underfoot.
Yeah. It's right underfoot.
Right where that plaque is. It's too bad it's reduced to this,
Yeah.
you drive a scenic marker there or something off the road, but underfoot, you could recapture that really bruising, disturbing, emotionally fraught, fearful, and exciting things were happening.
Right.
But now it's just emblazoned on a little plaque, and it seems like etched in amber. Who cares?
And maybe nobody looks at it when they go by.
No, that's terrible.
So the other thing, Daniel, is when you write a drama, let's say, I another thing that caught my eye was Memory Box, because it's something like that is really kind of close to home for me. But when you write a drama, let's say, is something that maybe was a part of your life at one point, or is that something that maybe inspired the story?
That grew out of the other. I've only written 2 novels. The other novel was called Mr. Wonderful, and that's a phrase that my stepmother used to describe my father in sort of an overly glorious way.
Sure,
he was a wonderful guy, but he wasn't Mr. Wonderful. Anyway, he suffered from dementia.
Okay,
I'm not sure I'd go so far as to say it was Alzheimer's, but he had a pretty bad case of dementia late in life. And when you watch people become the shell of the person they are, it's really rough as they say, it's rough on the caregiver more than anything else. Right. And Memory Box is a short I did that I'm really proud of too, because it switches the point of view around at the end, and you're forced to rethink. Wait a minute, who's confusion? Who's confused in this story? The younger person, or the old man? Right. And it makes you think about that. You have to see it to get what I'm talking about. It's a real change in perspective, twist it toward the end of the film. But it all came from my father's experience and my experience watching him, and trying to talk to him and be with him in the days toward the end of his life, and realizing that that's a fate that a lot of us may face. And we got no cure for it,
My both my grandparents suffered from that, and also one of my uncles right now. So very, like I said, close to home. I can't wait to watch that piece. The other thing I wanted to get into is maybe some advice that you might have for some of our younger listeners that might be looking to get into being either a playwright or a screenwriter or a novelist even. What kind of advice would you give somebody just starting out to keep them maybe inspired to keep going? Because some people like to give up, and we don't want them to give up. So what kind of advice can you give them?
Well, you really shouldn't give up unless you find this to be painful, and not doesn't have to be joyful, but it needs to be invigorating. It needs to be tap your soul, like everybody, myself included, starts off writing pretty poor stuff, but that doesn't matter. I remember I've sat in a research center in Chicago. I was supposed to be working on my history book. Instead, I wanted to write about things that were going on in my family. That I turned it into a play that was terrible. But and I don't know, we never even produced it. I think we had a reading or something, and that was enough for me. This is not well written. It's overwritten, but it got me so inspired to say, I want to find out how these people think on their feet. Create characters, make them go through conflict, and that was exciting for me. For other people, it's just getting something off their chest. I guess the best, I don't think I'd say that the cliche of write what you know. The only part of that that's true is write what you know in your heart matters to you. Yeah. But just in terms of, like if you wanted to start writing a play, you would not have to say, I've got to write about a podcaster. It doesn't have to be. Right. But maybe people, learning from people, knowing how to listen, knowing how to tease out things from other people. Maybe that would be something that would be a starting point. But the most important thing is write what you care about. And I haven't always followed that. Most of the time I have, but when I haven't followed it, it's usually been kind of prosaic and not very interesting what I wrote. But if it's something you really care about, follow your nose and your heart about that, because that will help you, number one, keep writing, and number two, hopefully write something that matters. Because if you really care about something, your heart and soul will show up on the page, and it'll show up in the way it's performed, or if it's a novel, the way readers pick it up. The emotional truths of your life are what you should constantly be thinking about, whatever they are. And that usually is have to admit, people writing about what they know.
Right.
If they grew up on the streets, they're going to write about life on the streets. But it's not just that. It's, okay, what happened in that life on the streets, right. that gripped you, that made you who you are, that you can't shake, keeps you up at night, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I appreciate that. And I know our listeners do as well. Daniel, what are you? I know you mentioned earlier you're working on some projects. So, what can we be excited about that's going to be coming out that we can keep an eye out for? Well,
I wrote a sort of a high concept thriller called Bloodborne about a young man that down on his luck has PTSD and finds out one day by going to the blood bank all the time just to make money that lo and behold his blood cures cancer. Oh. And you think, oh, that's a great story, that's uplifting. No, that's the beginning of the end for him.
Oh, okay.
Big Pharma comes after him, hammer and tong. He's on the run. It's kind of the fugitive meets Limitless, I guess.
Yeah.
And his sister has cancer, and he's in a cat and mouse game with Big Pharma to because if true, his blood would invalidate $6 billion worth of anti-cancer drugs they've got on the market. Yeah. So it's I don't mean it's a big policy thing. It really isn't, but that's partly what it's about. Is what do you do? And especially people keep up thought of he's a savior. He's like Jesus or something. Look at this guy. And he just wanted to help people out, especially his sister. And everybody's thinking, oh, you're going to have to monetize this in the biggest way. And he's not averse to that. But then he's got this big struggle with it. Like, well, should I even be paying attention to that? Well, hell yes, I should. I don't have any money. Yeah. But on the other hand, I get caught up in the world of these people who are obviously craving after my money and are maybe going to take my life if I don't do what they want to do. So it kind of raises the stakes in an interesting way about ethical question.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're trying to get that set up right now. And I have a horror film, actually, that I wrote called with a young man here in St. Louis, too, called A Beating Heart that Cybil Shepherd is starring in, and we're going to try to get Xander Berkeley from The Walking Dead to join her. We're shooting that in Mississippi. Speaking of true stories, I shouldn't say too much about this, but I don't want to tell you the details about it, but just recently got contacted by some people who are putting together an enormous, like $400 million film fund, and they've selected me to write research and write and help produce feature film scripts and documentaries and limited series on strictly nonfiction stories that they've created.
That's fantastic.
And it's like wow.
Yeah.
So I'm doing one about a manhunt in Canada that is really cool because one of the people behind this project is from British Columbia, and that's going to occupy some of my time.
I guess so.
In a good way, in a nice way.
In a good way, right? It's always good to be busy. Yeah. That's fantastic, Daniel. I can't thank you enough for being on the show. And I always have this one question that I ask everybody that's on my show, and it's what do you want your legacy to be when it's all said and done? What do you want people to think about Daniel Blake Smith?
My wife always says that on my epitaph it'll say, "Here lies Dan Smith. He had questions," because I'm always questioning people, and I got it. I used it in documentaries because I was constantly interviewing people. But I guess in a broader sense, I'd like to think that all the years I've spent writing various things, I've said some things. I've done some storytelling that has impact and meaning. Maybe provokes them to think a little bit. Hopefully, is moving, compelling, sticks with them a little bit. That would be great to know. I know it was important to me, but I want to know that other people got something out of it, and I'd like to think maybe some of it did. Can't come off that way. Certainly, it was inspiring to me.
Well, you definitely have a fan in me. I can't wait to dig into a lot of this works of yours. And, DanielBlakesmith.com for all of our listeners. Make sure you check out his website. This is really well done. I love your website, Daniel, and can't wait to, again, share it on my social media as well. And best of luck to all the projects that you have coming up. They all sound very exciting. And I can't thank you enough for being. It's really an honor to have you on my show, Daniel. So thank you for taking the time.
I'm thrilled to see you reaching out to independent artists because, in the film world, we always say, independent film world, story is king. Yeah. And you're really reaching out to storytellers, whether it's singer-songwriters, other musicians, filmmakers. It's great. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of it.